Hello. So set up for the first shot of the day, and what I'm going to do with this is just spend a little bit of time going through filters and how to use them and what different types of filters you get. Essentially, one with a filter holder. So this is a Lee filter holder system like this, and this is a really versatile system, and we'll talk more about this in a second. And the other type of filter is, just get it out of my bag, which is a screw-on filter. So these filters just screw straight into the thread of the lens. Now both are great, both have their uses, and we'll go through that today and look at how to use them and why. Now I've done a little bit of work on using filters before in other YouTube videos. So I've got a video on long exposure photography that I will put up in a link now. But this goes into more detail about this filter system and about how to use it. So first of all, let's start with the Lee filter system. Now Lee filters are fantastic. They've been around for many years. The filter system that I use is quite old, and I've always found that it works absolutely brilliantly on any camera I've used. What happens is this: you have so you've got a filter holder, and this holder holds a polarizing filter on the front here, and then you can just about see it. These slots here, you can slot in other filters into the slot. So essentially, you could have a polarizer, and you could have a couple of ND filters on here. So firstly, before I put it on my camera and explain more, we just need to talk a little bit about why using filters at all, especially ND filters. So the thing about filters, the most important thing is to use your photographic eye. Don't think too much about the kind of technicality of it the whole time. But in some instances, it can be really useful. And some instances you just cannot do without a filter to create a certain type of shot. So the idea of an ND filter is essentially, if you like, a pair of sunglasses for a camera. So it can essentially do two things. So there's a variable ND filter which looks like this. Okay, and they are so away, that is filthy, I need to clean it. This is a much used variable ND filter. You can probably just about see the change in tone there. And this is called a soft grad, and this is a 3-stop ND filter. And what this does is essentially it tries to balance out the tones in the landscape. Sky 90% of the time is brighter than the ground. So it balances that out by using this. Now, these need to be used with a little bit of caution. And there's a couple of very good reasons for this. The first is this. If you have something like, for instance, we've got the lovely Clevedon pier behind me, which I'm just about to photograph, this will darken not only the sky, but the entire scene. So it will darken the pier itself. And that can give you a few issues. Another type of grad is a hard grad. Now, as you can probably see from here, this is nice. The gradation is very smooth. On a hard grad, they're mainly just designed for photographing sea with a very hard defined light sky and a hard horizon line with nothing in the horizon line at all. Now, generally, I never use them because I don't really find that they're that versatile, and you can come into lots of problems. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that with Lightroom and other programs like it, there is less need for a graduated ND because you can put filters onto Lightroom quite easily in post-processing, and do HDR photography instead, where you're layering 2 or 3 exposures to get the correct exposure overall. However, I find them to be really, really useful. So the other type of ND filter that, if I can find it, is a solid ND filter. Now this is a 10 stopper, and this is a filter that I use a lot. Now 10 stopper means essentially 10 stops worth of light. So what it effectively is a very, very, very dark pair of sunglasses. And what it will do for you is it will darken down the scene to the point where you are able to then make your shutter speed much, much slower. And that's something that I talk about in my long exposure video. Making the shutter speed slower in the middle of the day allows you to really blur those beautiful waters and make it as still and calm and beautiful as possible. Now, there are lots of other stops, so there's 1, 2, 3, 6. I don't tend to use, in terms of NDs, I use a graduated ND, which is the 3-stop, which I find balances skies really well. But in terms of the effects that I want out of filters, if I'm going to use a filter, most of the time it's to quite dramatically blur the water and change the scene in an artistic way. So so what I find I always use is I use a 10-stop or a 6-stop filter. So let's look at how to put these on the camera. Right, so first thing to use then is this piece of kit. So this is a Lee 72mm adapter. So basically, whatever the front of your lens is, so this is a 72mm thread on my 24-70. You can buy an adapter to fit it. They sell them all sizes. So you need to take any filters, any screw filters you've got on there off. And you need to put this on. Now this can be a little bit fiddly depending on weather and things like that. In winter it can be a little bit tricky to put on, but generally it's okay. So that's the first step. So that's the adapter on. And then the next part of it is putting on the holder. So this holder has got 2 little kind of teeth there, and it's got a little tooth here. So basically what we want to do is just take that and pop that on, and then you can lock it in place a little bit with this little brass switch. Okay, now as I said before, there's one for the polarizing filter that we can put on later, and then there's 2 slots for other types of filters. So if we just pop on a graduated filter to start off with, okay? So I'm just going to put that into the slot. Now, when you're photographing, generally, you should always put the filter as close to the camera lens as possible. So this is a little bit cumbersome, and you know, you're kind of cracking out a filter, and it's massive, slightly unwieldy, but it does really, really help with the scene. So you'll be able to see later how it changes the scene. So you push it up and down depending on how dark you want the sky to be. Now it's really, really important that when this filter's on, it's straight and not wonky, and it's aligned with the horizon. And you really need to just spend some time pushing it up, pushing it down to really see what type of scene you'd like to create. So the next filter is this big stopper here. Now this is absolutely black and dark. It's really important. This has got these kind of sealing rings on the back, and it's really, really important that you place it into the camera like this, and then make sure that it is completely sealed and it's completely square all the way around. Okay, so it seals in the light. Now, when you're photographing with this filter, you won't be able to see through it unless you have a mirrorless camera. Now, even if you've got a mirrorless camera and you're not using a DSLR, what's really important is to focus beforehand and set it to manual focus. And we'll go through that before we make a start. Hi, so we're going to start by using the ND filter, and we're going to do a 3-stop variable ND. So as I take it down, you can see the gradation change as I push it down into place. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for the sky to be taken down a little bit in terms of exposure, and just balancing it a little bit with the ground. So it's a really nice way of just easily changing the exposure manually. Now, a lot of people don't use variable ND filters anymore, but I just find that if you do everything you can in camera, then there's less to do when you leave, and also you know that you've already taken that shot. You've got a kind of confidence that you're already that shot is already done, so it can be really useful. So so I'm just pushing this down now with this kind of filter. I don't need to worry about checking. Sorry. Don't need to worry about working in manual at all, manual focus or anything like that. I can expose through the back of the camera, absolutely no problem. So I can put it on autofocus. I'm going to have it on aperture priority, and I'm going to take a shot. Now before I take a shot, I'm just going to put it on shutter release mode and just check my focus and then take a shot. Okay. And looking round that, it's just balanced that sky out just a little bit with the landscape that's around it and the seascape. Now, the other important point to make here is that any filter, whether it be a polarizer or whatever that filter is, it's best if you don't point it right at the sun. Generally, if you're working right at the sun and you're not working away from the sun or at right angles to the sun, it is best just to use a camera lens without any filter in it at all. That way, you're using the kind of purity of the camera lens, and you're relying on the lens coatings on the outside of the camera to stop any lens flare or ghosting or anything like that. That's just something that really kind of gets in the way of your shot when you're using filters. You can have multiple lens flares from multiple filters, so it needs to be a little bit tricky with it, but I'm happy with that. So let's try that again, and this time we're going to try it with a 6-stop filter. So this is my 6-stop filter, and this is different. This is made by Urth, which are actually really good, cheap, good quality filters. They come in these fantastic filter cases, and they are absolutely brilliant. Now, I'm using this today for 2 reasons. Firstly, to show you a 6-stop filter and what it does, but also to talk to you about color cast. Now, color cast is something that that you do have to put up with in some filters. Generally speaking, but not always, the cheaper the filter, the more the color cast. So so when you're so I'll just put that on. So when you're photographing with slightly cheaper filters, you can get a color cast. Now, color cast is basically where the filter is filtering out the light, a bit like a pair of sunglasses, but it adds a color to it. Now, it can add a purple, it can add a blue color cast, a slightly kind of blue color cast. Now, these color casts you can correct in post using Lightroom or Photoshop or other programs, but they can also be quite atmospheric, and sometimes I leave them on. Now, this one, from my experience of using it, has got a slightly purple color cast, But I don't see anything wrong with that really. Okay, so next thing is then, so with this one, I can still photograph through the back of the camera. Now you should be able to just about with the 6-stop filter do this with the digital SLR as well. But with mirrorless, you can definitely photograph through the back of the camera, meaning that I don't need to, I can keep it on autofocus. I don't need to worry too much unless it's lower light. If it's much lower light, then probably have to take it off autofocus, focus first, and then put the filter on. Okay, so what this will do, this I've never seen, I just must point out, I've never seen the sea so calm here and peaceful. So filtering the sea isn't doing a great deal, I must say. It'll just add some detail to the reflection of the pier and make that detail really, really crisp. But the sea is like a pond today, it's incredibly calm. Anyway, so it will add an effect similar to a 10-stop, but not quite as extreme. And it might add a slight colour cast to the image. So let's take the shot. So first of all, I'm currently on 1 second. I've got f8 and ISO 200. Now, the reason that my ISO is slightly further up, because normally you try and keep your ISO as low as possible, and the reason it's slightly further up is that I find for most of the work that I do that although I want to delay the shutter to smooth out the water and get that effect, I also don't want to encourage any camera shake. So any wind, anything knocking the tripod in any way, when you're doing such a long exposure as this, and this is only, what's it? Yeah, 1 second, so it's not too bad. But if you're doing a 1 minute long exposure, for instance, like we're about to do with the 10-stopper, or even 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, you really want to reduce that time as much as you can, but get the effect that you want. And the best way of doing that is with ISO, because if you do it with aperture, you're sacrificing some of the image quality in terms of sharpness, because you want to keep the f-stop at around kind of f8. Anyway, let's crack on. So here we go. So let's take the shot. Okay, so this is slightly different and it's slightly more of a faff and slightly harder. So first thing is I've got my filter holder and I've put my 10-stop filter into it. Now it's best to do that before you get it on the camera. Firstly, so you can just check that the back's in perfect alignment and it seals. You've also got to put it in the one that's closest to the camera, in the slot that's closest to the camera there. Okay. But more importantly, you need to set up this shot a little bit more. So first thing is I'm going to put it in aperture priority just to make this as easy for me as possible. So I'm going to take a reading. So at the moment I've got f8 on the 50th of a second. So I'm going to just change that slightly. Okay, so I'm going to go to I'm going to use f11 just to get a little bit more detail. ISO 80 and 1/10 of a second. Now, what I need to do then is I need to get my Big Stopper app. So the Big Stopper app tells you what you need for different exposures. Now it'll show you for 3, 6 and 10 stops, and I think maybe 15. And there's a dial, and the dial shows you what shutter speed you'll need for the shutter speed showing on your light meter. So the shutter speed at the moment is 1/10 of a second. So I've got to scroll the dial on the app I'll put it up here on the screen so you can see it. I'll scroll the dial on the app so that I take it to 1/10 of a second. Now, 1/10 of a second, once you put this pair of effectively sunglasses on it, will turn into a 2-minute long exposure. So that's what we need to do. We need to put this on and take the time to do that. Now, the other thing that is good to prepare in aperture priority is your focus. So if you just put it on autofocus, you can zoom in and check your focus perfectly, and then turn it off. Okay, so you're now on manual focus, but it's perfectly focused. Then you need to move your camera to manual. That's the next bit of the faff. And then the next thing is to put the filter holder on. So, oh, whoops. So here we go. Right, so the filter holder's on. Okay, now I need to take my exposure for 2 whole minutes this time. Okay, so 2 minutes is just about up. Right, so when I have a look at this shot, it won't make a massive difference to the last shot in this actual situation, but it's good to show you how to use it. So if I just zoom into that one, and yeah, it's looking great. And Lee filters are really, really fantastic filters. They really create a really beautiful artistic effect. Fab. Right, I'll put that shot up on the screen now. So I hope that really helps using different types of filters for different reasons. Now, I mean, there are lots of different ways that you can use them in different locations. Ultimately, they can be a bit of a faff sometimes, and it's just working out the best filter for you. A lot of the time, I mean, I've found that the 3 filters in terms of ND filters that I've taken everywhere and used everywhere are the ones I've just shown you. So I hope that's helpful, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.